So as an overview, today we've got Tim from Symplectic, we've got Jenny and Adam and myself from the Jisc ORCID support team trying to facilitate and help the discussion here. And first of all, we'll start with the demo of the new Symplectic features interacting with the ORCID registry, and followed by a discussion where we'll be thinking about how do you communicate with researchers, what are the messages you need to be giving out, what methods might you use, and questions like that. And that's really open over to the floor to share ideas, questions you might have, and just connect with your peers, see if there's any common things we can do also as a support service or as a community to share resources and thinking in this area. So at this point, I'll hand over to Adam to introduce Sam.
Hi, everyone. I'm double checking that I am not muted because that's something I do a lot. Good.
I can hear you, Adam. Thank you.
So we're going to have a presentation from Sam on the new features, as Monica's just said. So what we're going to do is let Sam run through his presentation uninterrupted, and then we'll facilitate some questions at the end if there are any. Okay, so put some questions in chat as the presentation proceeds, but we'll address all of those questions at the end. Okay, hope that's clear. Okay, so with that, Sam Gibbons-Frendo is a junior product manager for Symplectic. He's worked for them for the past 2 years, supporting Elements CRIS across UK higher education. He brings a wide variety of technical and communication skills to their team, and today he's bringing us the latest updates on how Elements integrates with the ORCID Registry. And with that, I'm going to hand over to Sam and his presentation on the ORCID integration with the Symplectic Elements.
Okay, thank you very much, Adam, for the introduction. If I click share, no, I think if you stop sharing your screen, I can then share my screen. There we go, almost. Okay, now, there we go. I will share my screen. Bear with me one moment. Present. Yeah, right, I'm in control. So, thank you very much, everyone, for taking the time to join this webinar and to learn a little bit more about Elements' new or comparatively new integration, right integration with ORCID. I'm going to start by giving a bit of a review of the use of ORCID IDs in Elements. And so this is how we historically used ORCID IDs, and this essentially formed the foundation on which we built the new right integration. I was having a look at the names in the list, and I think most people are Elements clients, which kind of makes sense. If you're not, I'll try not to get stuck into too much technical Elements-y sorts of words. I'll try and kind of keep it relevant to everyone. And after I've run through the current approach to the behavior around ORCID IDs and Elements, I'll then speak through the new right integration, what we're here for. And this is formed of two components. This is the ability for users to send their publications over to ORCID, and also to assert their affiliation with an organization in ORCID. And these pieces of functionality are both released, they're out there in the wild on these different versions. We do have some upcoming functionality that I'll touch on, which will be released in 5.20 at the beginning of April. And of course, I'll log into Elements and show you around, show you how it all works. I'll try to keep it brief-ish. I obviously kind of will cover everything, but I think what will probably be most interesting is the sort of questions and discussions at the end. So yeah, I'll be going at a bit of a clip, but not too fast. So the way in which ORCID IDs are currently used in Elements can be thought of in kind of two distinct approaches. We use ORCID IDs for the automatic harvest of publication IDs from ORCID. and this has been going on for a long time. And this is essentially when users connect to their ORCID account in Elements. We will read their ORCID record, return persistent identifiers from specific publications, and use these to fetch those publications from other data sources. So it's a sort of indirect approach to collecting the information from ORCID. It's only really the persistent identifier which is returned from ORCID, and then the publication metadata itself is returned from potentially multiple data sources. The benefit of this is it allows us to create an active link with the source, the data source we'll be getting the data from, and that means we can pull down supplementary information, and we just find it kind of provides a robust approach to using the information in a user's ORCID record. The other sort of side of the picture is the use of ORCID IDs in Elements for auto-claiming. Now, auto-claiming, as I'm sure most of you know, is a sort of quite a specific Elements piece of functionality that allows the system to automatically do stuff based on the presence of identifiers. And so it's not just ORCID IDs that we use for this. ORCID IDs are a range of identifiers that the user can essentially claim and say, yes, this identifier represents me in the real world. And so if we see that identifier, the ORCID ID in a publication's metadata, the user can optionally say, yeah, that is me, auto claim it, put it in my claimed publication list. They can also suggest that we suggest it to them, we put it in their pending list, and this is done by claiming an ORCID ID in Elements. You don't have to connect to it for this to happen. So these are two distinct pieces of functionality that existed previously and still exist with the release of the right integration. So this will make more sense when I'm in the system and I'm clicking around, but I do just want to kind of give a high level summary of what I'll be covering and discuss the three sets of features that allow this integration to work. So this is system configuration, user authorization, and then the ongoing user control of the right integration. So if the system is not configured to allow users to write to ORCID, the behavior won't change from the current behaviors. Users would see very little, I think no difference. So the first thing that has to be done is that a system admin enables the right integration for the institution. And this is done globally. It can't be done for an individual primary group, for example. It's an all or nothing. System administrators can define the mapping between Elements publication types and ORCID work types. There is an out-of-the-box mapping, but one of the real benefits of Elements is its flexibility. And institutions, organizations can create custom types. And so if this has been done, then it is possible for the system administrator to define what work type that represents in ORCID. So, when it gets sent across to ORCID, how should that be represented there? And then also the global settings page in Elements contains the information about the affiliation, which gets sent to ORCID when the user asserts their affiliation in ORCID. User authorization. So users on upgrade will have potentially authorized Elements to read from ORCID. That's what they'll have done when they're connected to ORCID. They will need to re-authenticate and grant Elements these extended permissions to be able to write to ORCID. And so that point there is just a reminder that an additional step is required by users, essentially for security reasons. And then once it's set up and the user has connected, they have ongoing control over what's been sent. They can decide whether or not to send publications and or assert their affiliation independently. They essentially define a set of publications which will get sent across, and Elements will sort of trundle along in the background, constantly keeping the data in ORCID up to date based on any metadata changes that we see in Elements. So the idea is that hopefully across all of these different different feature sets, it's pretty painless, and it's the sort of thing that can be done once and then left alone. Of course, it can be revisited and changed, you know, at a later date, but the idea is we try to make it align as much as possible with the current behavior of Elements, and to really be as simple as possible to control. So this additional little thing that is being released it might confuse things a little bit, but I did want to mention it because it is coming soon. And this is really just in response to customer feedback. We're extending the admin controls to allow only verified manual records to be sent to ORCID. Again, we're getting into Elements terminology. I'm sure most of you are familiar with the concept of a verified manual record, but that's what this is related to. And I won't touch on that more in the demo because it's not currently being released. But if people do have questions, I'll be more than happy to answer them. And now I will have a little look-see in our Elements system. So, as I'm sure most of us are aware, this is what Elements looks like when you log in. The ORCID Write integration is managed on the data source management page for ORCID, and it is both enabled here. So this means that ORCID is enabled as a data source, and it means we can read from it. And this has to be checked yes in order for you to enable the write integration. So you essentially extend the current behavior to include the write integration. You can see in this demo system the write integration is enabled, and this means that users will see a new ORCID settings page under their My Account menu. Now, I'm just going to impersonate a few other users so we can see what it looks like in different states. So if I impersonate Nick, who is a product manager here, you can see that he's got an ORCID on his profile page, on his home page. He's being prompted to connect to it. So Nick has claimed an ORCID, so it will be used for automatic claiming. But he's not connected to it. And if we see the ORCID settings page, essentially he's told that currently he's only using his ORCID to support automatic claiming, and he has the option to connect to ORCID. Now, if I impersonate another user, Jonathan Breeze, our CEO, he's done a little bit better. You can see he's got his ORCID. He's being prompted to send publications from Elements to his ORCID account. And if we see his ORCID settings page, we can see that Elements is enabled to read data from his ORCID account. So Elements will be looking in his ORCID profile, will be looking at the persistent identifiers and returning them, using that to support his the searching of data sources that is carried out by Elements. But he's not enabled Elements to read and write from, and he's got this prompt to reconnect. And so this is what I was talking about. This is if users have currently connected to ORCID, when you upgrade and enable the write integration, this is what they'd see. They'd be prompted to reconnect so that we can write to ORCID. Of course, they don't have to if they don't want to, but they will need to reconnect if they want to write to ORCID. Now, finally, I will prompt, I will copy, I'm going to impersonate our ORCID demo user, who has, of course, oh, bear with me, so I've got the menu shenanigans going on. So our ORCID demo user has enabled Elements to read from and write publication data to his ORCID account, his ORCID record. The default configuration when this option is chosen is for journal articles, only send published and published online journal articles. This is an option that can be turned off. You can see this user has 6 publications. 5 publications have been sent to ORCID, and when 1 journal article has not been published and not been sent. So these counts at the bottom will give users an understanding of why things have and haven't been sent. We only kind of go one layer in. We give an absolute count of publications in these different states. Obviously, these can then overlap. So by default, we will not send publications where you've marked your relationship as private. A user can choose to override that by selecting this option. And a user can also choose to essentially take complete control over what gets sent by only sending favorited publications. Now, I imagine that most people on the call will know what I mean by publications that have been marked as private or favorited, but essentially these are existing elements controls that allow users to control what the system does with their publications. And so we're sort of piggybacking on that existing functionality to control the ORCID write integration as well. And so the final piece of the jigsaw puzzle is the ability for a user to send their affiliation. The eagle-eyed amongst you will have spotted that this is also controlled on the ORCID settings page, sorry, on the ORCID data source management page. And again, it's possible to have the write integration enabled without this, but it is not possible to have the affiliation assertion enabled without the write integration. So these are sort of progressive extensions to the write integration. The information that gets sent is managed on the global settings page. So we can add a grid ID, city of main campus, the organization country. There is a slight complexity in that the type of affiliation that we send will either be an employment affiliation or an education affiliation, and that is dependent on a new flag that we've added to users called the isStudent flag, which by default will be set to null or will not be set. And so there may be some need to modify your HR feeds or to set this flag manually if you do have students. And finally, I'll just show you what this looks like. So you can see our demo ORCID user has 1 affiliation which has been sent, a number of different works that have been sent, and if we look at this one, you'll see that a BibTeX citation format has been sent across. This is sent from either the highest precedent record or the user preferred record. And as this changes, if this were to be updated, if the metadata were to change and improve over time, this would be reflected in ORCID. We send all of the persistent identifiers that we have to that record, and this helps with the matching process in ORCID. It's not impossible for duplicates to be created in ORCID, but if things are being sent from elements and have been already added manually to ORCID or bought from other data sources, there is the potential for duplicates to be created. These could then be managed in ORCID, but of course, if they have matching DOIs or other persistent identifiers, these will bundle together in the way that ORCID is able to match these records and kind of turn them into objects. Now, I think I have just about covered everything. I also think we got a number of questions coming through. I hope I didn't go too quickly with the whistle stop tour. Just to say that I mentioned that you could manage the mappings between the elements publication types and the ORCID work types, and this is done at the administrator level on this same page. It's quite a simple download upload of a CSV. You just change the publication types in order to see it. Now, I think I'll stop there and open it to any questions.
Okay, Sam, thanks very much for that. I really appreciate it. I've got a couple of questions in chat. I'm just going to through them from the time that I've seen them. So the first question we've got is from Robin at Imperial. Notification-wise, is there any way to notify either users or admin when the queued works have been sent? Or have we got a guideline as to how much time it should take or we should allow?
Yep. So that's a very good question. There's a couple of things to bear in mind. Sends will be carried out with a relatively high priority, and deletes will be carried out with a higher priority. So, for example, if a user were to accidentally say that they'd send publications where you've marked relationships private, and then realize that they'd made a mistake, and reject, taken back that action, those deletes from ORCID would go through with a high priority. Now, exactly how quickly that would be is kind of dependent. So, for example, let me see. Oh, I need to sign in to delete this. But sending the affiliation, and this won't create a duplicate, but you can see that it's updated it. It won't have actually changed anything here. But if I had logged in and deleted that and then sent it again, it would have gone through almost instantaneously. Affiliations are sent from the website with that button click. Because publications are more complex, it's the role of the synchronizer with elements to enqueue the work, just like harvesting from other data sources. And saying how long this will take is very difficult, because it depends on the size of your system and it depends on its activity across another a series of other actions. So I don't want to give a definitive answer on that, I'm afraid, because it really does just depend. On our test systems, we can see it happening within a few minutes. On much larger systems, it could take significantly longer. The ongoing updates to metadata are done at a lower priority, and I think that it will make sure that it updates everything kind of every 2 weeks. So I'm afraid the answer to the question is a little bit complex, unsurprisingly. But the sort of short answer is that a user should be able to see those their publications in ORCID, relatively quickly. They shouldn't have to wait days. They shouldn't really have to wait hours. It should be there quite quickly. Ideally, it's going to be in the minutes region. I just can't give you an exact number. They will be told. Let me see if I can play about with this. I'm loath to kind of do too much to our demo system. But
notifications would be good to hear about, Sam.
Yeah, so they will be told when something has been sent. So it would say, let's see if we can just prompt something to happen. How we don't have any relationships with private. So what I'm trying to get at is they will have 0 publications have been sent to your ORCID account. 5 publications are waiting to be sent. So they will get an indication that something is going to happen. This run sync button actually pushes them to the front of the queue. It doesn't have to be used. It will speed things up slightly if they're in a particular rush. There is no notification, for example, on the publications page that something has been sent to ORCID. You will not see a little this has been sent to ORCID. Essentially, you would need to go to your ORCID and check there to see if the thing has been sent. System administrators, I think, can if there is any trouble, they can delve around in the system logs to try and find out what might be happening. But there is no, in the current version, in V6 released later this year, things might change a little bit, but currently there is no sort of ongoing notifications about, this week X publications have been sent to ORCID. It's kind of managed at that user level, and we give as much information as we can on this page about what hasn't been sent, but that's it for notifications.
Okay, so logging and reporting wise, you're not reporting on volume at the moment. Can I summarize that from what you've just said? Yes.
So it would be possible to create a report from the reporting database to determine what has been sent. We do have basic reports on whether or not users have connected to their ORCID, whether they've set up read and write. So you can see those sorts of numbers. But in terms of 100,000 publications have been sent to ORCID, not in the UI as it stands.
Okay, thank you. Just to follow up from that, Robin says they've been advising to check after 48 hours.
Yes, that should be plenty of time.
Fab. Then from John Salter and Catherine Shop, is there a global setting to use the ORCID sandbox for an Elements test server so that they can do tests and demos locally?
Yes. So essentially, this was our Elements discovery demo system here is connected to the ORCID sandbox. All demo systems should be connected to the ORCID sandbox. It can make testing a little bit tricky. Essentially, when you're setting up the connection between Elements and ORCID, you connect to the live registry in your live system, but in your dev system, you use the credentials for the sandbox when you're setting up that connection. Now, that involves adding some items to the config file. I would suggest, if you need support with that, just to send a message to support, and we'll be able to talk you through it. Depends whether you're hosted or self-hosted, but it is possible to connect to the ORCID sandbox at the instance level.
So it's possible. Okay, so just again to totally clear, it's possible to connect at an individual Elements instance level to the sandbox.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, from Robin again, what happens if the user selects read and write, but does not select run sync?
The data will still be sent across. Run sync simply expedites their position, the send. It bumps them up to the top of the queue. We were originally, the working name for this button was push me to front of queue. We realized that didn't quite sound sort of serious enough, so we went with run sync. We might add some wording here, because it seems like it's possible that users think that it won't do anything unless they press run sync.
Right.
It will. Okay. But there's no harm in them pressing run sync. So if they hit run sync, they'll get their little pop-up saying, you've been added, it's been enqueued, and they can sit back and relax. So it doesn't matter if they do or they don't. Essentially, it will just speed things up if they do.
Okay. I'm guessing for the people that have been encountering questions about that, that's part of the advocacy message that we might go on to discuss in a minute, because communications around that will potentially be something that we'll need to make clear to people encountering that button, right? Because people will look at that and potentially think, without pushing that button, everything will just stay. But I think that's something we'll come on to in a minute, okay? Okay, thanks everyone. I think that's the questions in the chat. Unless anyone wants to put anything else in, I'm going to wrap up this thing. Thanks again, Sam, for the demo. We've just had some feedback on it would be really helpful to have some simple instructions on setting up a sandbox in an instance, a connection to sandbox in the instance. And we've got one more question. Is it for your affiliation data, are you considering adding start and end dates?
It is not on our roadmap for this year, I think is
okay.
is the best. Yeah, it's something we did consider at the time. You know, we're always open to the possibility of it extending and improving the integration. So it may be something that comes in future, but yeah, it's not on the roadmap for this year, is what I would say.
Okay, thank you for that. Okay. Thank you very much, Sam.
Shall I stop sharing?
If you could stop sharing your screen now, that would be great. Thank you to everyone who put a question in. We are taking notes for this, and we will make sure that we put a copy of the notes out, and also work with Sam to make sure that resources and everything are available too. So we're going to move on to the second part of this webinar now, and I'm going to hand over to Monica for a discussion about institutional management of rolling these changes and updates out.
Thank you, Adam. Sorry, it took me a little while to unmute there. So I've just written up a few basic questions to help us think about communicating to researchers, but it's really over to the floor to help raise any questions you have that you might want others to suggest maybe what they've been thinking already, and also to share what you've already done or whether you've tried something that's worked, to help others get ideas. And especially if there's any ideas around resources we could share and how we can support that, that would be great. So the kind of things we're looking for are maybe the key messages that we need to communicate to researchers, whether that's something very specific around features or generally around understanding how this is going to work, what kinds of methods, and whether that's through the screens, through screen prompts, or through events or meetings or workshops that you might have available to raise awareness of the new functionality, whether that's involved some internal planning, for example, working across the library and IT services, and how that's being approached, and any other challenges that we haven't mentioned yet that you've thought about, and where you are in that journey. So I think if we leave this, I will try and see if I can still see the questions as well, if anyone's happy to open. And we can, I think we can unmute if somebody wants to raise their hand, or you can put questions in the chat. I've got Jenny monitoring the chat there. I'm trying to have a look at it as well.
Yeah, nothing yet.
So we know that we know some people had some concerns, and they were thinking, should we turn off the ORCID functionality until we figured out the communication strategy. But from what I heard from Sam was that you could keep the ORCID functionality as it was before the improvement. So I don't know if Sam can confirm if that's correct.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So essentially, if the right integration isn't turned on, the elements of the behavior of elements won't change from what it is currently. So if you have ORCID enabled, users will be able to connect to it. We will read from their record. We will use ORCID IDs for automatic claiming, and nothing will change. If you like the right affiliation, right publications, but not the send affiliation, that can be done. It's not possible to only do the affiliation and not the right integration, or you can have the whole set essentially.
So for anybody who wants to take some more time to prepare their communication materials, they can keep the functionality going as before.
Exactly. You would upgrade to any of the versions, I think it was 5.18 and 5.19 that have this capability, and nothing would happen until the admin goes in and turns on the right integration. And then all that would happen is the users have access to that ORCID settings page, and each user individually needs to re-grant permissions and go through those the steps of deciding what they want to have sent. And then things get sent across. So it's enabled at the admin level to all users, and then each user would go on and extend it.
So there's been a comment from Andy Reid saying that it didn't seem to be possible to roll out just to a pilot group.
Yes, so that is correct. The right integration is turned on, globally. It's not possible to turn it on by group, be that primary group or other. It can be tested in the with the sandbox environment in a dev system, but I appreciate that's not quite the same as rolling it out to a pilot group. Again, if that level of control was something that users deemed really important, it's something we could look at, but it isn't currently on our roadmap for this year. I'd be open to it being suggested as a feature request, etc.
Did we have an offer from Robin to share what they've been doing?
Hello, can you hear me? It's Robin from Imperial.
Thanks, Robin, I can hear you.
Hi. Yeah, so we enabled the connection, obviously, for everyone, for all the users. And then once it was enabled, we wrote a web page of instructions, which I can send here in the chat link. And what we've then done is we directly emailed a group of about 1,500 members of staff to ask them to follow the instructions. I would say that the take up for that seems low, although I haven't done reporting as to how many users followed the process. I do feel like based on the amount of feedback I got that probably out of the 1,500 it was a small amount of people actually even opened the email and followed the instructions. Those that did, I think generally it seemed quite simple. And we were refining the instructions as we went through those instructions on the web page. I think by far the biggest problem we've encountered is people following the reauthorization, running the sync, but then keep their privacy settings on, and so it looks like to them that that it hasn't worked because they're looking at their own ORCID and don't see any papers coming through. So just the next step is that we're going to work through these problems is to then do wide communications across college, all stuff to follow.
Yeah, that's quite interesting. So the ORCID settings page will, will say you have 100 publications, 99% of these are marked as private and will be not be sent to ORCID. I guess there is an issue that those counts are at the bottom of the page, and of course, yeah, people are less likely to scroll all that way down. So yeah, there could potentially be something around kind of we could do about sort of key points like that, it being a bit more highlighted, perhaps. We've started playing with the idea of kind of having perhaps some pop-up notifications to kind of really spell out what's going to happen.
Yeah, I think that would be really good. I think the main point is just that staff, often they're not familiar with Symplectic or with even being logged into ORCID, and so just like instructions or pop-ups that say this has been completed, this is what is going to happen, would be really helpful. Yeah,
no, I think that's a very good point. And of course, for myself, you kind of things, it becomes so second nature to think of publications as being relationships marked as private, or
definitely we have the same.
And then of course, the day-to-day reality of an academic who's just occasionally engaging with the system and wants it to do something. There are elemency jargony words which are it's easy to sort of skip over, kind of making it clear. No, I think that's very interesting feedback. And as I said, we were kind of starting to think about what we could do with some pop-up messaging. I will look into that in a bit more detail. We've had some other feedback, and we may well sort of make some tweaks to the text in the blue boxes. The one of the sort of struggles is, of course, the more information you put, the less people will bother to read it. A big chunk of text is not gone through in a sort of in the same level as a simple sentence or bullet point. So we're always trying to balance that need to try not to be too verbose and try and just put the high level points in. But of course, that sometimes isn't enough. And so more than happy, if people have got suggestions to text, suggestions for pop-ups, put them on a feature request, pop it into the support site. The feature request support sites is monitored. I see everything that comes in. And of course, it's really helpful to get feedback from the community so that we can improve what we do. And I appreciate, I've said a few times, that's not on the roadmap for this year. That doesn't mean necessarily that we won't get round to it, and small changes can obviously be made that much more easily than large changes. So please do feel free.
That would be great, thank you. And just that for when any changes do happen, if we can be notified, because the instructions that we've written, I've tried to make everything step by step with screenshots. So I would want to update those accordingly.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, any changes to the UI will be flagged in the release notes. It may be that we could do something more than that around ORCID. I'd be interested. I see we've got another question in there, and I'll answer that. I'd also be interested. If possible, for people to just sort of say whether they're planning on turning it on, when they're planning on turning it on, whether they'd likely use the affiliation or not. Just a simple sentence could be quite useful to get a gauge on the sort of the mood out there. Obviously, you don't have to say anything if you don't want to, but it could be quite interesting to kind of see the lay of the land. So no, thanks, Robin. Shall I can see a question from John Salter. I will skip to that unless there's anything else from you, Robin.
No, I just
not from me.
I just wanted to thank Robin. I think that's a really useful way, because someone said, can you turn the functionality only for groups? That's not there, but it's a different way to approach that, is by doing some specific communication to selected groups, like a pilot almost. I think that's a great idea to help refine your communication and your strategy. Even if it's turned on for everyone, you can send some targeted emails to smaller groups. That's a great idea. Thanks, Robin.
Cool. Okay, and so John Soldier's question is, are there any places in the user-centric ORCID settings page where we can add a link to institutional advice? Currently there is not. That page is not customizable. That would be relatively simple to implement, and I would just encourage you to put that in as a feature request. Yeah, and you know, I'm not making any promises, I'm afraid, but you know, when we have a feature request, it's reviewed, it's prioritized, you know, alongside the other things that need to be done, and we can see, you know, other institutions, other organizations can comment on it, extend it, upvote it, etc. So I think that is a very good idea, John, and of course it would be a relatively simple change, I think.
Are there any other questions in the chat or any raised hands, Jenny?
Nope. Nothing in either.
Okay, I did manage to get the time up earlier. So it's 20 past, so we've nearly been going for an hour. It's all been really, really useful. Just give a last couple of minutes if anyone has any thoughts on their communications, on their support materials around using the sandbox, maybe. I think there was some discussion earlier about adding dates to the affiliation. Gabby, did you want to add anything around that? As a more general point, not specific to Symplectic.
Hi everyone, this is Gabby from ORCID, and yes, the question arose earlier on the chat about how to determine whether a researcher is currently affiliated with an institution or not. And for that reason, we encourage our members to push affiliations with start dates, and if possible with end dates as well when that person leaves the institution. We have had a lot of community feedback about this information not being accessible for the integrators, and that's why we encourage this, but it's not mandatory. And it's great to hear that yeah, Elements is aware of this challenge, and that you might be able to consider this for future development.
Yes, I think it would be very nice to have, but yeah, essentially is that data there? Is the data reliable? And then, you know, a number of additional sort of complexities as well, particularly around end dates, and you know, people have left the institution, so they no longer have access to the right integration, and are we going to just send stuff on their behalf even though they haven't asked us to? And it started to get quite thorny quite quickly, and that's kind of why we sat back. But yeah, we are aware of it, and it is something that's you know, we are considering for sure.
Yeah, I think all around the thinking around when someone leaves the institution and you still have the permissions for their ORCID record, I think as we move to more and more experience of using ORCID, that these questions will come up more, is how do you handle that someone has left? Maybe they haven't updated their permissions, so technically you've still got permission to write to their ORCID record. So I think that's a good question for our members to start thinking about, if anybody has any thoughts on that. and you're welcome to add them to the chat. Otherwise, we'll give it a few more seconds or minutes and wrap up, and I'll hand over to Adam to wrap up. I think also questions around how easy would it be to add those dates if they're held in other systems outside of Symplectic Elements, and if anyone has done any work around sharing between Symplectic and other institutional systems. That would be of more general interest again to discuss. Anything else in the chat or in the hands? Raised hands?
So Andy Reid has said, does right push will only work for current users? I thought that question was going to come up, and the answer is yes. So this, yeah, we will stop sending information to ORCID when is current is null, or is false rather, and so yeah, the system still has those permissions unless the user specifically revokes them, but we won't update the record.
Adam, shall I hand over to you to wrap up?
And he actually remembers to unmute again. It's going. Yes, thanks, Monica. I think it's probably about time. Okay, so thanks everyone so much for coming to this session. I hope you've all found it as useful as I have. Thank you for presenting and for the questions and queries. Thank you everyone who's participated in either providing us information with asking questions. It's been really useful. What we're hoping to do now is, as we said, we've recorded this, so we're going to put the recording available publicly. Please let us know if you have any issues with any of the things being recorded being made public in the chat now. Otherwise, we will make some version of the notes of this also publicly available. And then going forward from this, we hope to build a community around discussions on the topics that we've raised here, both around the issues about using Robin's approach of soft targeting users, even if you've launched for all, which, as Monica already mentioned, is a great idea, to the fact that you can upgrade and update your Symplectic, but still keep everything the same and not necessarily launch right integration straight away, if that's a strategy that you need to follow. So make sure we've captured the messages and discussions that we've had, and then grow this as a resource and the community discussion around it. And we'll notify everyone here that we've got information about it. And anything else that we have in the information. So as Monica's just said in the chat, help@jisc.ac.uk in these working from home online times will always be triaged and sent to us, and we will respond to you. So thank you very much again, and we'll close it now almost exactly on the hour. Thank you very much.